After my parents passed, my sister got $28 million and threw me out until the lawyer asked one question. That's the first thing I remember clearly, a sting sharp enough to cut through the fog of grief and disbelief. $28 million. It wasn't a typo, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the number that landed like a wrecking ball in the middle of our meticulously constructed family facade, shattering everything I thought I knew about my parents, about my sister, about myself. I stood in the grand foyer of the estate, the scent of lilies and old money still clinging to the air, feeling more like an intruder than the daughter of the people who built this place. My sister, Claire, a woman I'd shared scraped knees and whispered secrets with, now stood before me, her eyes like chips of ice, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that only amplified the venom underneath. "Well, Sarah," she'd said, her gaze sweeping over my simple black dress, a stark contrast to her own designer ensemble. "I suppose this is goodbye." She gestured vaguely towards the heavy oak front door, as if I were a delivery person who'd taken a wrong turn. The will, read just hours before in the oppressive silence of my father's study, had been a surreal experience. Mr. Abernathy, our family lawyer for as long as I could remember, a man whose gravitas usually soothed, had looked increasingly uncomfortable as he navigated the clauses. My parents, Martha and Robert Sterling, had always been private, but this was a betrayal of epic proportions. They had built their empire from scratch, a series of successful businesses that had afforded us a life of privilege, private schools, European vacations, summer homes on the coast. We were the Sterlings, a name synonymous with stability, success, and a deeply ingrained sense of loyalty, or so I'd believed. The entirety of the Sterling Family Trust, including all liquid assets, real estate holdings, and business interests, is bequeathed in equal shares to my daughters, Claire Elizabeth Sterling and Sarah Margaret Sterling. Mr. Abernathy had cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. However, and here's where the floor dropped out from under me, due to certain documented concerns regarding Sarah's past judgment and perceived volatility, a stipulation has been placed upon her inheritance. These assets are to be managed by a trust, overseen by Claire, until such time as Claire deems Sarah to be financially responsible and capable of managing substantial wealth. In the interim, Sarah will receive a monthly stipend of $5,000, managed and disbursed by Claire. $5,000 a month. For me. While Claire, who'd never held a steady job, whose greatest financial accomplishment was maxing out credit cards on impulse buys, was handed the keys to a kingdom. The air in the room had gone thick with unspoken accusations. My parents, bless their souls, had always been a little too protective, a little too worried about me. I'd had a rough patch in college, a bout of depression after a painful breakup, a period where I'd experimented a little too much with prescription medication. And yes, I'd made some questionable choices. Nothing illegal, nothing that ever landed me in serious trouble, but enough apparently to be deemed a flight risk when it came to millions of dollars. Claire, on the other hand, had always been the golden child, the one who charmed her way through life, never facing the sharp edges of consequence. After the reading, the lawyer had excused himself, leaving us in a suffocating silence. Claire, ever the performer, had feigned a look of concern. "Oh, Sarah," she'd said, patting my arm with a hand that felt strangely cold, "this is unexpected. But Mom and Dad, they must have had their reasons. They loved us both so much, you know. They just wanted what was best." Her eyes, though, held a flicker of something else, something akin to triumph. It was the look of a hunter who had finally cornered her prey. That evening was a blur. My few belongings, mostly clothes and books, were unceremoniously packed into boxes and piled by the back door. Claire insisted it was for my own good. "You need to find your own way, Sarah," she chirped, her smile never wavering, though her eyes were hard. "This is a chance for you to grow, to stand on your own 2 feet. This whole mansion, it's a lot for one person to handle, and frankly, you've always been a bit overwhelming." She'd made it sound like my presence itself was an inconvenience. I left that night, the keys to my modest apartment in the city clutched in my hand, the $5,000 a month feeling like a cruel joke, an insult. The sting of rejection, of being judged and found wanting by my own parents, by my own sister, was a physical ache. I remembered the drive home, the city lights blurring through my tears, the vast emptiness stretching before me. My parents had been my anchors, my world. To have them gone, and then to be cast adrift by the very person who should have been my closest ally, it was a special kind of hell. The first few months were a constant battle with humiliation. Claire would forget to transfer my stipend on time, forcing me to call her to grovel for the money I was rightfully owed. She'd send me condescending texts, checking in, asking if I was managing, followed by thinly veiled suggestions that I was failing. I saw her posting lavishly on social media, trips to Aspen, designer handbags, champagne brunches with friends I vaguely recognized from our privileged social circles. It was a constant gnawing reminder of what had been taken. My inheritance wasn't just money, it was my security, my future, my sense of worth. It was the promise of a life unburdened by financial worry, a life where I could pursue my passions without looking over my shoulder. Now I was meticulously budgeting for groceries, for gas, for the occasional movie ticket, all on an allowance that felt designed to remind me of my perceived inadequacy. I tried to reach out to old friends, but the truth was, life had a way of diverging. Most of my college friends were already climbing career ladders, getting married, buying houses. Explaining my situation felt like admitting failure. My sister's managing my inheritance, I'd stammer, the words tasting like ash. The polite nods, the awkward silences, the subtle shifts in their demeanor, it all screamed pity. Pity was almost worse than contempt. My parents' will wasn't just about money, it was about control. And Claire, with her calculated sweetness and chilling efficiency, had become the master of that control. She never raised her voice, never resorted to overt cruelty. Her weapons were far more insidious. Passive aggression, subtle manipulation, a constant drip feed of condescension that chipped away at my self-esteem. She'd email me investment opportunities that were clearly scams, then shake her head sadly when I declined, lamenting my fear of risk. She'd invite me to family gatherings, only to subtly highlight my financial dependence, making pointed comments about how nice it was that I could still afford to come, as if I were a charity case. The house, the Sterling estate, had always been a place of warmth and belonging for me. Now it was a symbol of my exclusion. I'd drive by sometimes, catching glimpses of the manicured lawns, the stately columns, and a knot of anger and sorrow would tighten in my chest. It felt like it was mine, too. My parents had loved me just as much as they'd loved Claire. Their will, however, had painted a very different picture. I started to question everything. Had they really believed I was so irresponsible? Or had Claire, always the manipulator, poisoned their minds against me? The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. My parents had always been fiercely protective of me, especially after my depression. Had Claire twisted their concern into a justification for her own greed? I tried to read the will again, poring over the legal jargon, looking for any loophole, any overlooked clause. Nothing. It was all there, in black and white, giving Claire absolute power. She was the trustee, the gatekeeper. She could, technically, withhold my stipend if she deemed me financially irresponsible. The sheer audacity of it, the power she wielded with such ease, was terrifying. I imagined her in her sprawling mansion, sipping wine, making decisions about my life with the same casual dismissiveness she'd used when deciding what to wear. The emotional toll was immense. I found myself becoming withdrawn, anxious. The vibrant, outgoing person I used to be felt like a distant memory. I was trapped in a cycle of anger, sadness, and a gnawing sense of injustice. But somewhere, deep within the despair, a tiny ember of defiance began to glow. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about proving them all wrong. It was about showing Claire, and maybe even my parents' ghosts, that I was not the volatile, irresponsible child she'd painted me to be. One rainy Tuesday, about 6 months after the will reading, I received an email from Claire. It was a brief, curt message forwarded from Mr. Abernathy's office. It simply stated that a meeting had been scheduled with him and that I was expected to attend. No explanation, no pleasantries, just the stark, cold directive. I felt a flicker of dread, but also a surge of something else, a desperate hope. What could Mr. Abernathy possibly want? Had he unearthed some forgotten detail? Had he had a change of heart? The possibilities, however unlikely, were enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through me. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were professional yet understated, wanting to project an image of quiet competence, a stark contrast to the volatile persona Claire had so carefully crafted. I drove to his office, the familiar marble facade of his downtown firm doing little to soothe my nerves. The receptionist, a woman I'd known for years, offered a sympathetic smile as she announced my arrival. The wait felt interminable, each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner amplifying the thrumming in my chest. Finally, Mr. Abernathy's door opened. He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. He gestured for me to enter, his expression unreadable. The study was exactly as I remembered it, lined with leather-bound books, the scent of polished wood and faint pipe tobacco hanging in the air. Claire was already there, perched on the edge of a plush armchair, a picture of serene composure. She offered a small, tight smile in my direction. "Sarah, thank you for coming," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice measured. He sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, the same desk where my father had signed countless business deals, where my parents had pored over spreadsheets and planned our futures. "Claire has asked me to facilitate a discussion regarding the trust." My heart sank. So this was about Claire reinforcing her control, about another round of condescending lectures. I braced myself. "As you know," Mr. Abernathy continued, his gaze shifting between Claire and me, "your parents, Martha and Robert Sterling, established a trust for Sarah's benefit, with Claire named as the trustee." He paused, and I could feel Claire's eyes on me, a predatory stillness in her posture. "This is a common arrangement, particularly when parents express concerns about a beneficiary's financial maturity." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I understand," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Claire leaned forward slightly. "I've been doing my best, Sarah," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic, "to ensure the trust is managed responsibly. It's a significant undertaking, and I want to make sure that when you eventually take over, you're truly ready." Mr. Abernathy held up a hand, a subtle gesture that silenced Claire. His eyes, usually so clear and direct, now held a trace of something I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps hesitation, or maybe a dawning realization. "Sarah," he said, turning his full attention to me, "when your parents drafted their will and established this trust, they provided me with extensive documentation. They expressed their deep love for both of you and their desire for your futures to be secure." He picked up a thick manila folder from his desk, tapping it lightly. "They detailed their reasoning for the trust, the concerns they had about potential mismanagement of funds by you." I nodded, my stomach clenching. Here it comes, I thought, the familiar litany of my supposed failings. "However," Mr. Abernathy continued, and this is where the air in the room shifted, where the carefully constructed facade of Claire's triumph began to crack. "In addition to those documented concerns, your parents also provided me with a secondary set of instructions. These instructions were to be enacted only under specific circumstances, to be revealed to you now." Claire shifted in her seat, a faint frown creasing her brow. "What secondary instructions, Mr. Abernathy?" she asked, her tone sharpening slightly. Mr. Abernathy ignored her. He opened the manila folder, his movements deliberate. He pulled out a single, folded document, different from the others. It looked older somehow. "Your parents were meticulous," he said, his voice taking on a more somber tone. "They believed in safeguards. They believed in fairness, even when faced with difficult personal circumstances. They loved you, Sarah, deeply. And they wanted to ensure that your inheritance, the wealth they worked so hard to build, would ultimately be yours, without undue influence or control by any other party." He unfolded the document, his eyes scanning the pages. "This document," he stated, his voice gaining a quiet authority, "outlines a contingency. It states that should Claire, as trustee, ever attempt to unduly control, manipulate, or withhold Sarah's inheritance beyond the stated stipulations of responsible management, or should she act in any way that is deemed by the supervising council to be in bad faith, then the entire trust, including all assets and management responsibilities, is to be immediately and irrevocably transferred solely to Sarah Margaret Sterling." Claire's face went ashen. Her carefully cultivated composure evaporated, replaced by a raw, unadulterated shock. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mr. Abernathy looked directly at me, his expression now clear, almost triumphant. "And Sarah," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet power, "as the supervising council appointed by your parents to oversee the trust, and having witnessed the events of the past 6 months, the pressure tactics, the demeaning communications, the clear attempt to exert control beyond the scope of reasonable financial oversight, I have made my determination." He met Claire's wide, terrified eyes. "Claire," he said, his voice firm and final, "you have acted in bad faith. Your actions have demonstrably proven that you are not capable of managing this trust responsibly, nor are you acting in Sarah's best interest. Therefore, as per the express wishes of Martha and Robert Sterling, I am executing the contingency." He looked back at me, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Sarah, as of this moment, the entirety of the Sterling Family Trust, all $28 million, and all associated assets and responsibilities are yours, completely and irrevocably." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock, a stark counterpoint to the storm that was about to break. The air in Mr. Abernathy's study crackled. thick with unspoken accusations and the sharp, acrid scent of Claire's sudden terror. My own breath caught, suspended somewhere between disbelief and a dizzying wave of relief so profound it felt like a physical blow. $28 million. Not $50,000 a month. Not a stipend managed by a sister who had weaponized parental concern into a tool of absolute dominion. Mine. All of it. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was vindication. It was the crushing weight of years of humiliation and injustice dissolving in an instant. Claire finally found her voice, a strangled, desperate sound. No, that's impossible. Mr. Abernathy, you can't. You don't understand. She was still looking at him, but her gaze was wild, unfocused, as if the reality of what he'd just said was an alien language her brain refused to process. Her hands, which had been resting demurely on her lap, were now clenched into white-knuckled fists. Mr. Abernathy remained calm, his gaze steady. Claire, I understand perfectly. Your parents foresaw the possibility of difficult dynamics. They loved you both, but they also recognized the potential for conflict. They wanted to ensure their legacy was protected and that Sarah would ultimately benefit fully. The documentation here is quite clear. He gestured to the folder, then to the document he held. My role has been to act as an impartial executor of their final wishes, and based on the evidence, my decision is final. He stood then, a man of quiet authority, and began to gather the papers on his desk. I will be preparing the necessary transfer documents immediately. Sarah, I will require your signature on several key agreements. Claire, I suggest you consult with your own legal counsel regarding your rights and responsibilities moving forward. This meeting is concluded. He didn't look at Claire again. He met my eyes, a look of quiet understanding passing between us. He knew, he had seen, and he had acted. It was more than I could have ever hoped for. I stood, my legs feeling shaky, but my resolve hardening with every beat of my heart. The humiliation that had clung to me like a shroud for months was starting to shed, revealing something steely beneath. Claire let out a choked sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. You can't do this, she repeated, her voice rising. She's unstable. You know she is. Mom and Dad wouldn't have wanted this. Mr. Abernathy paused at the door, turning back to face her. His voice was gentle but firm. Martha and Robert Sterling wanted their wealth to be managed responsibly and for both their daughters to be provided for. They took steps to ensure that. The stipulations were clear. You, Claire, were given the opportunity and the trust to manage Sarah's inheritance in her best interest. Your actions, or rather your lack of discretion, and your apparent desire to exert undue control have led to this outcome. This is not a punishment, Claire, but the execution of a contingency plan designed to protect Sarah's inheritance. He opened the door wider. Sarah, I'll have the documents ready for you by tomorrow morning. Please come to the office at your earliest convenience. Until then, I advise you both to consider your next steps carefully. I walked out of that office with my head held high, the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders with each step. Claire remained behind, a defeated, terrified figure in the opulent study, the architect of her own downfall. The drive home was a blur, not of tears this time, but of a fierce, simmering anticipation. The $5,000 stipend, the condescending texts, the social media taunts, they all flashed through my mind, not as sources of pain anymore, but as fuel. The first thing I did when I got back to my small apartment was to pour myself a glass of wine, the cheap kind I could barely afford just hours before. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, and for the first time in a long time I felt a profound sense of peace, tinged with a dangerous, exhilarating sense of power. Claire had underestimated me. My parents, misguided by her manipulation, had underestimated me. The world, which had seen me as a fragile, volatile mess, had underestimated me. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The next morning, I was at Mr. Abernathy's office before they opened. He greeted me with a knowing smile, handing me a thick stack of documents. He explained each one patiently, his voice calm and reassuring. The transfer of the Sterling family trust, the business holdings, the real estate portfolio, it was all being officially transferred to my name. He confirmed that Claire had been notified and had been given a time frame to hand over all relevant documentation and access codes. She's not going to make this easy, Sarah, he warned, his brow furrowed. She's proud, and she's accustomed to control. She will likely try to obstruct the process. Let her try, I said, my voice steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, burning determination. She's had her fun. Now it's my turn. The following days were a whirlwind. Claire's initial shock morphed into a furious resistance. Her emails became less about concern and more about thinly veiled threats. She claimed there were outstanding debts on the estate that I needed to settle, fabricated financial discrepancies, and outright lies about my parents' final wishes. She even attempted to leverage her friendship with Mr. Abernathy's junior partner, a young lawyer named David Chen, trying to get him to question the validity of the contingency clause. But Mr. Abernathy was a seasoned professional, and he had anticipated Claire's every move. He had already secured the necessary legal opinions and had prepared for any challenges. He calmly presented Claire with legal notices, demanding compliance and warning of severe consequences for any further obstruction. Her attempts to create chaos only served to further solidify her guilt and bad faith in the eyes of the law. The real turning point, the moment when the true depth of the betrayal began to unravel, came a week later. Mr. Abernathy called me, his voice urgent. "Sarah, I found something significant." When Claire was in the process of handing over the financial records, there was a peculiar discrepancy. She omitted a considerable portion of the investment portfolio. We're talking about offshore accounts, shell corporations, things that were not part of the initial inventory provided by your parents' financial advisors. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I've had my forensic accounting team begin an investigation. It appears Claire, acting under the guise of managing the trust, had been quietly siphoning off funds into accounts that were not disclosed in the will. It wasn't just a matter of mismanaging your inheritance, it was outright theft, planned and executed over a period of time." The revelation hit me like a physical shock. It wasn't just that she wanted control, she wanted to steal from me, to strip me bare after our parents were gone. The thought of her sitting in my childhood home, sipping champagne, while meticulously orchestrating the theft of our parents' life savings sent a surge of pure, icy rage through me. "She's a thief," I said, the words tasting like bile. "She is," Mr. Abernathy confirmed grimly. "And this changes things, significantly. It elevates her actions from a breach of trust to criminal conduct. She has not only acted in bad faith, she has actively engaged in fraud and embezzlement." He then explained that my parents, in their meticulous planning, had foreseen the possibility of extreme financial malfeasance. The contingency clause wasn't just about Claire being difficult, it was a failsafe against outright criminal intent. They had provided Mr. Abernathy with access to a secure digital vault, accessible only with specific authorization codes, containing encrypted financial records and directives that would be revealed if certain thresholds of suspicious activity were detected.
My parents, it turned out, had known their daughter better than I had given them credit for. They had trusted Mr. Abernathy implicitly to act as the ultimate arbiter, to protect their legacy and their daughters, even from each other. The investigation into Claire's offshore accounts quickly became a race against time. The amount of money she had attempted to steal was staggering, dwarfing the $28 million I had inherited. It was clear she had been planning this for years, using the guise of a struggling socialite to mask her insatiable greed. Mr. Abernathy, working with legal teams specializing in white-collar crime, initiated proceedings to freeze Claire's assets and prepare for criminal charges. The news of the investigation, subtly leaked to the right people within our social circle, began to circulate like wildfire. Whispers turned into shocked gasps, then into outright condemnation. The image of the charming, philanthropic Sterling family was rapidly dissolving, replaced by the ugly reality of a sister's avarice. Claire, cornered and desperate, stopped trying to negotiate. Her attempts to reason or manipulate me were replaced by venomous accusations. She called me, her voice raw with a mixture of fury and terror, spewing every insult she could think of, calling me a manipulative bitch, a gold digger, someone who had always been jealous of her. She threatened to expose my past indiscretions, to ruin my reputation, to make sure I never knew a moment of peace. "You think you've won, Sarah?" she shrieked over the phone, her breath ragged. "You think this is over? You'll never have peace. I'll make sure of it. You'll regret this. You'll regret ever crossing me." I listened, my hand still gripping the phone, the silence on my end amplifying her desperation. The rage that had simmered beneath the surface for months now burned with a cold, steady intensity. She had tried to break me, to control me, to steal from me, and now she was facing the consequences. The final confrontation wasn't dramatic, not in the way the movies portray. It was quiet, almost mundane, but infinitely more powerful. Mr. Abernathy had arranged a meeting at his office, specifically to finalize the handover of all remaining assets. Claire, accompanied by her own legal counsel, a nervous-looking man who clearly regretted taking her case, walked in, her face a mask of forced composure. She sat across from me, her eyes darting everywhere but at mine. Mr. Abernathy laid out the terms of the asset transfer, the detailed accounting of the stolen funds that Claire was now legally obligated to return, and the evidence that would be used in her criminal proceedings. He spoke of restitution, of prison sentences, of a life irrevocably tarnished. Claire remained silent, her composure cracking with each passing minute. Her lawyer cleared his throat repeatedly, trying to interject, but Mr. Abernathy's calm, unyielding authority silenced him. The air in the room was thick with unspoken history, with a decade of unspoken resentments, and a lifetime of manufactured familial harmony. When Mr. Abernathy finally finished, he looked directly at Claire. "Claire, your parents loved you. They wanted the best for you, but they also valued integrity and honesty. This outcome is not a reflection of their wishes for your life, but of your choices. Sarah has been awarded full control of the Sterling estate and all its assets, including the recovery of funds you attempted to embezzle."
He turned to me. "Sarah, you have been the victim of significant financial misconduct. The legal process will now proceed to ensure justice is served and your inheritance is fully restored, along with appropriate penalties for the crimes committed." Claire finally looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that was almost palpable. It wasn't the look of a sister, but of a cornered animal. The transformation from the sweet, charming girl who had shared my childhood to this vindictive, desperate woman was complete. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with a chilling promise. "You have no idea." I met her gaze, my own eyes clear and steady. The power had shifted, irrevocably. She had sought to destroy me, to control me, to steal everything I was owed, but she had only succeeded in revealing the true depth of her own depravity, and, in doing so, had unwittingly forged me into something stronger, something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The rage had cooled, leaving behind a steely resolve, a quiet, terrifying calm. I had been given back my inheritance, but more importantly, I had been given back my power, and I was just beginning to understand what I could do with it. The Sterling estate, the sprawling mansion that had once represented my humiliation, now felt like the perfect headquarters, a place to rebuild, to plan, and to ensure that those who had wronged me would never again have the opportunity to inflict such pain. Her threat, her final desperate plea for dominance, hung in the air, but it no longer held any power. It was merely an echo from a past I was finally ready to leave behind, and from which I would emerge, entirely on my own terms. The silence that followed Claire's hissed threat was absolute, a void where a sister's plea might have been. Mr. Abernathy's expression remained impassive, his gaze unwavering. He had seen this play out before, the desperate gambits of the vanquished. Claire, her face contorted with a fury that had long since eclipsed any pretense of familial concern, finally broke. Her lawyer, a man whose discomfort was etched onto his features like a permanent wince, gently placed a hand on her arm. She flinched away, as if burned. "This isn't over," she repeated, her voice cracking, the illusion of control dissolving into raw, primal fear. "You can't do this to me. You can't just take everything." Mr. Abernathy inclined his head. "The law is quite clear, Claire. Your actions have demonstrated a pattern of severe financial misconduct, fraud, and embezzlement. The evidence is overwhelming. The court will decide the ultimate consequences. For now, Sarah is entitled to the full restitution of her inheritance, and the Sterling estate's assets are to be managed under her direct control, as per the will's contingency clauses." He then addressed his junior partner. "David, please ensure the final asset transfer documents are prepared for Sarah's review by end of day. We will need Claire's cooperation to finalize the immediate transfer of all business accounts and property deeds within the next 48 hours. Any further delay or obstruction will be noted and submitted to the court." David Chen, looking pale but resolute, nodded. "Yes, Mr. Abernathy." Claire stared at me, her eyes wide, then narrowed with a toxic blend of panic and loathing. She seemed to physically shrink in her seat, the carefully constructed facade of her life crumbling around her. The socialite, the benevolent sister, the pillar of our community, all of it was revealed as a carefully crafted illusion, a mask for a desperate thief. She had always prided herself on her ability to manipulate, to charm, to get what she wanted through a combination of vulnerability and ruthless ambition. But she had played her hand too aggressively, too greedily, and in doing so, she had overplayed it completely. She pushed back her chair with a grating screech, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. You'll see.
You'll all see." She didn't wait for a response, practically fleeing the room, her lawyer trailing behind her, his head bowed in what looked like profound professional mortification. I watched them go, a strange sense of calm settling over me. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was something deeper, something more akin to the quiet satisfaction of a storm finally passing, leaving behind a landscape cleansed by its fury. The years of quiet suffering, the carefully swallowed insults, the gnawing insecurity, they had all been distilled into this moment. Claire's departure was not an ending, but a beginning. Mine. Mr. Abernathy turned to me, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "I am truly sorry you had to go through this, Sarah. Your parents were wonderful people, but they clearly had their blind spots, especially when it came to Claire." I managed a small smile. They did, but they also left me a way out, and you, Mr. Abernathy, were the key to that. Thank you. He returned the smile, a genuine warmth now in his expression. "You handled yourself with remarkable strength, Sarah. Remember, the legal proceedings will take time, but the immediate control of the estate is now yours. We will guide you through every step." Walking out of Mr. Abernathy's office that day felt like stepping out of a suffocating fog and into a crisp, clear dawn. The world looked different, sharper, full of possibility. My small apartment, which had felt like a sanctuary for so long, now felt like a gilded cage I had outgrown. The cheap wine was no longer a comfort, but a symbol of a life I was rapidly leaving behind. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, financial reviews, and strategic planning. Mr. Abernathy introduced me to a team of trusted advisors, each an expert in their field: investment bankers, real estate managers, estate planners. They worked under my direction, meticulously assessing the Sterling holdings, which were far more extensive and valuable than I had ever imagined. Claire's attempts to siphon funds had been ambitious, but ultimately unsuccessful in completely obscuring the true value of the estate. Her offshore accounts were a fraction of what she had tried to steal, a desperate, clumsy attempt at grand larceny. The mansion, the sprawling ancestral home where I had spent so many painful holidays, became my primary focus. It was a symbol of everything that had been denied to me, of the life Claire had so effortlessly enjoyed while I struggled. Now it was mine, not just to inhabit, but to transform. I envisioned it not as a monument to past grievances, but as a hub of future endeavors, a place to build, to innovate, and to create a new legacy, one built on my own terms.
Claire, true to her word, did not fade into obscurity. Her legal battles were public, sensationalized by the tabloids and the gossip blogs. The Sterling name, once synonymous with quiet philanthropy and old money, was now mired in scandal. Her attempts to paint herself as the victim, betrayed by a vindictive sister, fell flat against the mounting evidence of her criminal actions. Her lawyers argued for leniency, citing emotional distress and a history of mental health struggles, justifications that rang hollow against the cold, hard facts of her financial crimes. I stayed out of the public eye as much as possible, allowing Mr. Abernathy and my legal team to handle the fallout. My focus was internal. I immersed myself in the business side of the estate, learning about the investments, the properties, the intricate web of companies that made up my parents' legacy. The initial shock of the inheritance had given way to a deep, almost obsessive fascination. This wasn't just about money. It was about understanding the minds of the people who had built it and ensuring its future prosperity. One evening, I found myself standing in the grand ballroom of the Sterling mansion, the same room where I had once endured humiliation after humiliation at the hands of my sister and her cruel clique. The room was silent, empty, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the tall, arched windows. I remembered the sting of tears, the forced smiles, the desperate yearning to escape. Now, the space felt different. It felt like potential. I walked over to the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the faint light. I had always loved music, but Claire, in her suffocating control, had subtly discouraged any pursuit that wasn't aligned with her own meticulously curated image. She deemed my interest in music unrefined, a distraction from the important business of social climbing. I had let her win, too many times. Running my fingers over the cool ivory keys, I felt a tremor of something akin to rebellion. I sat down, and for the first time in years, I played. It wasn't a complex piece, just a simple melody that had always brought me comfort. The notes filled the vast room, a delicate sound in the heavy silence, a reclamation of a stolen joy. As I played, I thought of Claire, of her downfall. She had sought to control my life, to diminish me, to steal my inheritance and my spirit. But in her desperate attempts, she had inadvertently gifted me something invaluable, a clarity of purpose, a resilience forged in the fires of her own malice. The money, the power, the control, they were tools, yes, but the true victory lay in the transformation within me. I was no longer the girl who cowered under her gaze. I was the woman who now commanded this empire, who had navigated the treacherous currents of betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and utterly in control. The legal proceedings against Claire eventually concluded. The details were grim, a testament to the lengths she had gone to in her greed. The restitution orders were substantial, effectively stripping her of any remaining wealth and personal assets. The sentence, while not extensive, carried the weight of disgrace and public humiliation, a fate she had so often inflicted on others. She was sent to a minimum security correctional facility, her carefully constructed world reduced to a sterile cell. I never visited. The Sterling estate was officially transferred to my full ownership.
The sprawling mansion, the businesses, the investments, it was all mine. The transition was smooth, methodical, overseen by my team and Mr. Abernathy, who continued to serve as a trusted advisor. I moved into the mansion not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet, profound sense of homecoming. It was no longer a place of torment, but a canvas for my future. I began making changes, subtle at first, then more substantial. I renovated the neglected wings, transforming them into state-of-the-art offices for my burgeoning investment firm. I restored the gardens, planting them with vibrant, resilient flowers. I opened the estate's vast library to local students, creating scholarship programs and mentorship opportunities. The Sterling name, once tarnished by scandal, was slowly being reforged into something new, something that reflected my own values, my own aspirations. One crisp autumn afternoon, I stood on the veranda overlooking the estate, the wind rustling through the ancient oak trees. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light across the manicured lawns. I held a single, unopened letter in my hand. It was from Claire, sent from prison. I knew what it contained: more pleas, more threats, more desperate attempts to regain a semblance of power. But I wouldn't open it. I had already closed that chapter of my life. The weight of the past, the humiliation, the betrayal, it was still there, a faint scar beneath the surface, but it no longer defined me. It had been the crucible in which I was forged. The fear that had once held me captive was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence, a steely resolve. I had inherited not just wealth, but a legacy of resilience. The whispers of my past, the taunts of my sister, the judgments of the world, they were distant echoes, fading into insignificance. I was Sarah Sterling, and my story was just beginning, written in my own hand, on my own terms. The air was clean, the path ahead was clear, and for the first time, I felt truly, undeniably free.